My name is Clara Hayes. I took the night shift at Topeka Hospital out of desperation more than anything else. It was the only place in a 100-mile radius that was hiring nurses without experience on nights. My student loans were breathing down my neck, and I needed to start somewhere. So when they offered me the job after one interview, I said yes before they even told me the schedule. The hospital sits on the edge of Topeka, a small town surrounded by long, dry Texas fields. It's an old red brick building, standing like a forgotten monument against the wind. There's a newer wing that they built in the early 2000s, but the bulk of the hospital remains original, with narrow hallways, creaky floors, and rooms that smell like disinfectant and something older, something stale. My first night started like any other. I met with the day nurse, a woman named Kelly, who gave me a rundown of the patients. She was kind, but looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her eyes darted to the windows often, and her voice would lower when we passed certain rooms. She handed me a paper, not a clipboard, but an actual piece of paper, folded several times and yellowed around the edges. "These are the rules," she said. "They're not in the employee handbook, but you follow them anyway. Understand?" I opened the paper. It listed 11 rules, typed on a typewriter with small handwritten notes in the margins. 1. Do not respond to anyone knocking on the back exit door after midnight. No one comes in after hours. 2. If a patient named Mr. Grayson in room 209 calls for help, ignore it. He died in 1978. 3. The lights will flicker at exactly 3:17 a.m. Do not be in the West Wing when this happens. 4. You may hear a lullaby playing from the pediatric ward. There are no children here anymore. Do not go investigate. 5. If you see a nurse in outdated uniform attire, white dress, Red Cross hat, do not speak to her. Walk away calmly. 6. Room 304 must always be kept locked. The key is gone for a reason. 7. If you hear your name being whispered, ignore it, no matter how familiar the voice sounds. 8. Patients sometimes claim they see the man with no face. Do not ask them to describe him. 9. Do not use the elevator between 2 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. 10. If you find a blood trail that wasn't there before, follow it backwards, never forwards. 11. No matter what happens, do not let anyone in after 4 a.m. No one, not even staff. I laughed at first, thinking it was some weird hazing ritual or a long-standing hospital prank. Kelly didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. "You think this place is just haunted?" she said, her voice dry. "It's worse than haunted. Haunted means someone died and can't move on. This place, it's like something is still living here that shouldn't be." I tucked the rules in my pocket and promised I'd read them again later. Kelly left through the front lobby, not even waiting for the security escort they recommended for night shift workers. That should have been another red flag. The shift started quietly. I walked my rounds, checked on patients, filled out charts. There were only 11 patients that night, mostly elderly and all stable. The hospital felt quiet in the way that libraries do, like the air had weight, like it was watching you back. Around 12:15 a.m., I heard it. A soft knocking on the back exit door, the one near the supply room. At first, I thought it might have been a patient wandering, but the knocking was slow, methodical. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. I froze in the hallway, remembering the first rule. Do not respond. I waited. The knocking stopped after a minute, but I couldn't bring myself to walk past that hallway for nearly half an hour. I took the long way around, even though it meant walking by room 209. Mr. Grayson's room. It was supposed to be empty. No patients assigned there. But as I passed, I heard it. A man's voice, old and tired, calling out, "Nurse, nurse, please." My heart dropped. I took a step forward, about to open the door, when the second rule flashed in my mind. He died in 1978. Ignore it. Still, my hand hovered over the doorknob. The voice was so real, so human. It sounded like my grandfather used to, weak but still holding on. I whispered an apology and turned away. The voice didn't stop. Around 2:05 a.m., I made a mistake. I forgot Rule 9. I got lazy and took the elevator from the second floor down to the supply room in the basement. As the elevator door closed, the lights inside flickered and then went pitch black. The elevator didn't move. I was trapped. For a minute, I thought the power had gone out, but then I heard the breathing. Heavy, wet breathing, like something was in there with me. I couldn't see anything. No emergency light, no buttons lit up, just black. Then a voice whispered from behind me, right against my ear. "You shouldn't be in here, Clara." I screamed and slammed my hand against the emergency button. Nothing. I backed into the corner, my heart thudding so loud I thought it would burst. The breathing stopped after a minute. The lights flickered back on. The elevator door opened. I bolted out and didn't stop until I was back on the first floor, even though I'd never seen that hallway before. Everything looked off. The walls were the wrong color, yellowed and stained like old wallpaper. The lights buzzed overhead. The doors lining the hall had no numbers, just tiny windows with foggy glass. Something moved behind one of them, a shadow with long, jerking limbs. I turned around to go back and found that the elevator was gone. Not broken, just a blank wall. I backed away slowly and found a stairwell at the end of the hall. It took me back up, but I swear it was longer than it should have been. Every step creaked and the air smelled like rotting meat. When I reached the main floor, everything was back to normal. The elevator was there. The lights were normal. I checked the time. 2:34 a.m. I hadn't even realized how long I was gone. I didn't tell anyone. At 3:17 a.m., I was checking vitals in the east wing when the lights flickered. I froze. The third rule: do not be in the west wing when this happens. I wasn't. I was safe, but I still heard it. Screaming, coming from the west wing. A dozen voices screaming at once, some crying, some laughing. It lasted for exactly 60 seconds, then silence. Then the lights came back on. I should have left then, quit on the spot. But I stayed. I told myself I was imagining things, that my mind was playing tricks on me. Then the lullaby started playing, a soft mechanical tune, the kind you'd hear from a mobile over a crib. It came from the old pediatric ward, long since closed and sealed off. I stood in the hallway, staring at the double doors that led there. Dust covered the handles. No one had gone in for years. I remembered Rule 4, do not go investigate. But something moved behind the frosted glass. A shape, small, like a child. My radio crackled, a voice barely audible. "Clara, come play." I ran. By the time my shift ended, I was drenched in sweat and trembling. Kelly was waiting for me in the break room, sipping coffee like it was any other morning. She looked at me and smiled, a tired, knowing smile. "You followed the rules," she said. "That's all that matters." I didn't respond. I couldn't. That was only night one, and it already felt like something had followed me home. I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion. First nights are always the hardest, especially in a place as eerie as Topeka Hospital. Maybe I had imagined some of it. The breathing in the elevator, the voice in room 209, the child's lullaby. Maybe, but the paper with the rules was still in my scrub pocket, the creases now worn smooth from how many times I had unfolded it throughout the day. And I couldn't stop thinking about how Kelly looked at me that morning, like she had already seen this happen before, like she knew what I was going to see next. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. The shadows in my apartment seemed to move on their own. The refrigerator buzzed like a heart monitor. My neighbor's baby cried for hours, but I remembered them moving out 2 weeks ago. I sat on the couch with the TV on mute until the sun came up. By 6 p.m., I was back at the hospital. The building looked even more decayed in the daylight, which somehow made it worse. I expected to feel safer before the sun set, but the air inside was colder than it should have been. The reception desk was empty again. Kelly was waiting for me near the nurse's station with 2 cups of coffee. "You came back," she said, handing me one. "I need the job," I answered. She nodded. "That's what everyone says on day 2. We walked the rounds together that evening. Kelly was quiet, speaking only when necessary, and her steps were slower than the day before. She winced when we passed room 304, though she didn't say anything about it. The door was bolted shut with a rusted padlock. The paint was peeling. It smelled like burnt hair. "Does anyone have the key?" I asked her, mostly to break the silence. She shook her head. "We stopped trying to open it in the 90s. The last nurse who did went missing. She walked in during a shift and never came out." I stared at the door longer than I meant to. It gave off a pressure, like standing too close to a beehive. Something was inside. I could feel it. Later that night, just before midnight, I was making notes at the desk when I heard a loud clang from the utility hallway. The back exit door. Someone was knocking again. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. I froze. The first rule came back to me. Do not respond to anyone knocking on the back exit door after midnight. I didn't move. The knocking stopped for a moment, then started again. Harder this time, like fists slamming into the metal. I turned the radio up, pretending I didn't hear it. A few minutes later, silence returned. But then the security camera feed flickered. The monitor showed a figure standing just outside the back door, thin, tall, wearing a hospital gown, barefoot, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, like the neck had been snapped. I stared at the screen. Its arms were long, too long, fingers pressed against the glass. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was blurry, distorted, like the camera couldn't focus. Then it raised its hand and waved at the camera. I turned the monitor off. At 1 a.m., I went to check on Mrs. Ortega in room 312. She was an old woman with dementia, barely spoke above a whisper. As I entered her room, I found her sitting upright in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the corner of the room. "He's here," she said softly. I turned to look, but saw nothing. "Who's here, Mrs. Ortega?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for my hand and squeezed hard, stronger than I expected. He walks the halls when the walls bleed. "What?" "Don't look at the windows. He's behind them. He watches." The heart monitor next to her began to beep erratically. I checked her vitals. Everything was normal, but she kept repeating one thing under her breath as I adjusted her blanket. "He has no face. He has no face. He has no face." The 8th rule. Patients sometimes claim they see the man with no face. Do not ask them to describe him. I had already broken the rule. I told myself it wasn't real, that it was just a woman with dementia and a tired mind making connections where there were none. But I avoided every window after that. Around 2:20 a.m., I remembered the elevator incident and chose the stairs. The stairwell was narrow and dimly lit. As I descended to the basement, the light bulbs overhead flickered and then turned red. I stopped midway down. Red light filled the stairwell, and the temperature dropped sharply. I could see my breath. Something was above me. I didn't look up. I didn't want to. I backed down slowly, hand on the rail, eyes on the floor. A creak sounded on the landing above. Something dragging. I moved faster, reaching the basement and locking the stairwell door behind me. Whatever it was didn't follow. The basement was quiet, and the supply closet was still where I remembered. But there was something odd this time. A new door, farther down the hall. One I didn't remember seeing the night before. It looked older than the rest of the building, made of heavy wood with a strange iron symbol carved into it. I shouldn't have gone near it, but something pulled me forward. A feeling, like someone whispering my name just below the threshold of hearing. I stopped a few feet away, and the whispering stopped. I turned to go, and the doorknob rattled. Not violently, just one soft twist, like it was checking if I had locked it. The door was not supposed to be there. I ran back upstairs. By 3:10 a.m., I was near the west wing again, double checking that no one was inside. I didn't want to be anywhere near it when the lights flickered. As the clock ticked to 3:17, I counted down under my breath. When the lights flickered, I heard the screams again. Only this time there was something else beneath them. A deep hum, like a chant. Voices in a language I didn't know. It went on for a full minute, then silence. The walls near the west wing had started to bleed. Not dripping, seeping. A dark black-red fluid oozed from the cracks between the tiles, from under the door frames. I didn't touch it. I didn't even get close. I just stared. By 4 a.m., I was back near the nurse's station, staring at the exit. I remembered Rule 11. Do not let anyone in after 4 a.m. No one, not even staff. That's when I saw her. A nurse. Blonde, hair tucked neatly beneath a white cap with a red cross. Her uniform looked like something from the 1950s. She smiled at me through the glass door and knocked once, gently. "Can you let me in, dear?" she asked, muffled through the door. Rule 5. If you see a nurse in outdated uniform attire, do not speak to her. I hadn't remembered fast enough. She tilted her head, still smiling. Her lips didn't move, but her voice echoed in my head now. "Open the door, Clara." I stumbled back. The lights above me buzzed violently. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, she was gone. The rest of the shift passed in silence. When morning came, Kelly was waiting again. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. She saw it in my face. The fatigue, the fear. It's only going to get worse, she said, her voice heavy. You've seen the door, haven't you? I didn't ask which one she meant. I just nodded. Kelly took a deep breath and placed a hand on my shoulder. You're in it now. Just follow the rules. That's all you can do. I left the hospital that morning with the sun on my back and the feeling that the shadows were following me anyway. I began to dread the hours between dusk and dawn. Every tick of the clock after sunset seemed to echo louder, a countdown to whatever twisted things waited inside those hospital walls. I should have quit. I should have walked away after that second shift. But I didn't. Something was keeping me there. Maybe it was the money. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was that weird pull I couldn't explain, like the hospital itself had its hooks in me now. I barely slept in between shifts. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. The nurse in the outdated uniform, smiling with bloodless lips, her face frozen like a porcelain mask. I stopped looking into mirrors. My reflection seemed slower than me. Sometimes it blinked when I didn't. On night 3, something changed. Kelly wasn't waiting for me this time. The front lobby was empty when I arrived, and her car wasn't in the parking lot. I checked the staff schedule. She was supposed to be on until 8 a.m., same as usual. The head nurse's desk had a note taped to the phone. It was in Kelly's handwriting. Don't look for me. Tell no one I'm gone. Keep following the rules. If you hear my voice, don't listen. It's not me. My hands shook as I read it again and again. I folded it and stuffed it into my pocket with the original rule sheet. Now I had 2 relics, each written by someone who had clearly lost parts of themselves inside these walls. The night started too quiet. The usual low hum of the hospital, the buzz of fluorescent lights, the shuffle of IV carts, the occasional beeping monitor, was missing. Even the patients seemed unusually still, their monitors reading steady, almost too steady. Around 11:45 p.m., I did a walkthrough. I paused outside room 304. The locked door looked darker than before, like the shadows pooled a little thicker around the edges. I didn't get closer. Not after Kelly's warning. Not after I'd seen what happened to people who got curious. I was halfway down the hallway near the west wing when I noticed something wrong with the floor tiles. They were shifting. Not physically moving, but the pattern had changed. Subtle, but I'd memorized that hallway by now. Where there were once cream-colored tiles, there were now black ones forming an uneven trail. A path. I ignored it. That's when I heard it again. The lullaby. Soft, mechanical, echoing faintly from the pediatric ward. The doors had been boarded up long ago, sealed with metal braces and thick chains. But tonight they were open. Not wide, just slightly ajar. Enough to see the flicker of a spinning mobile inside. Something was moving just beyond the threshold, tiny feet pacing back and forth. Rule 4, do not go investigate. I turned my back to the doors and tried to walk away. That's when the crying started. A baby. No, not a baby. Something trying to sound like one. The tone was off, like a broken recording. Nurse, I'm cold, I'm cold, I'm cold. Over and over, louder, angrier. I clenched my fists and kept walking. I didn't look back. It stopped suddenly, cut off mid-wail like someone hit pause. At 1:33 a.m., the lights in the east wing flickered 3 times and went out completely. I was standing at the nurse's station with only the emergency backup light glowing red above me. A voice crackled through the intercom, a male voice I hadn't heard before. Clara Hayes, please report to room 209 immediately. My blood ran cold. Room 209. Mr. Grayson's room. The dead man. Rule 2, if he calls for help, ignore it. I backed away from the intercom. Then the voice came again, not through the speaker this time, from behind me. Clara, I'm still waiting. I turned, heart pounding, and saw him standing at the far end of the hallway. Pale, with sunken eyes and a half-rotted hospital gown. One hand clutched a blood-stained IV pole, the other reaching out toward me. He grinned. I ran. I took the stairs down to the basement again, even though I knew better. My hands were slick with sweat as I gripped the railing. The stairwell lights blinked, and for 1 second the world went silent. Then I heard laughter. Not human, deep, distorted, like someone playing a recording backward. When I reached the basement, the air was thicker than before. The door with the strange symbol was still there, but now something had scratched into it. My name. Once, then twice more. Clara, Clara, Clara. Below it, something new was written in red. He has no face, but he sees you just fine. I backed away slowly. The door vibrated. Not shook. Vibrated like something behind it was breathing in quick, desperate bursts. I bolted back upstairs, heart pounding so loud I couldn't hear my own thoughts. At 3:17 a.m., the hospital began to change again. The West Wing moaned. That's the only way I can describe it. The building groaned like it was in pain, like it was alive. I didn't get close, but I could see the lights bending in the hallway, like gravity itself was warped. Something big was moving in the dark, a shape with no definition, a figure so black it swallowed every ounce of light around it. Not a person, not a ghost, something older, ancient. It didn't walk, it slithered. And as it moved, the walls bled again, this time in pulses, as if the hospital was exhaling liquid. I backed away and didn't stop until I was in the east stairwell. I didn't want to see what came next. At 4:03 a.m., someone knocked at the front door. I wasn't near it, but I saw it on the security feed. A man in scrubs, his face blurred like the figure from the back door on night one. He slammed his hands against the glass and yelled, but the audio was scrambled. I couldn't make out a single word. Then I saw his name badge. It was Kelly, but the name tag was burned. His clothes were soaked, and his hands were backward, palms facing the wrong way. I didn't let him in. Instead, I watched as he stood motionless for 5 minutes. Then his body bent backward at the waist, his spine arching unnaturally until his head touched the floor. He walked away like that, on feet and skull. I shut off the feed. At sunrise, I went to the break room. Kelly wasn't there. No one was. When I left the hospital, I saw something written in the condensation on my car's windshield. Why are you still here? But the worst part? I had locked my car the night before. The windows were sealed. No way for anyone to get inside. Unless it never left. Unless it's coming home with me again. By the time my fourth night rolled around, I had stopped pretending I was just tired or overworked. Whatever was happening at Topeka Hospital wasn't a collection of hallucinations or ghost stories. It was real. It was intentional. And it wanted me to stay. The rules were no longer suggestions. They were survival instructions. I tried not to think about Kelly. Her warning note replayed in my head over and over. Don't look for me. Tell no one I'm gone. Her voice had been calling to me in dreams now, sometimes in her normal tone, sometimes distorted like a radio losing signal. I couldn't trust the sound of her anymore. I didn't even trust myself. The lobby was darker than usual when I arrived that night. One of the bulbs above the front desk had blown out and hadn't been replaced. I asked the clerk about it, but he didn't answer, just stared at me with glossy eyes like he was underwater. The elevators dinged, empty and waiting. I took the stairs. By 11:30 p.m., I had made my first rounds. Everything was quiet, too quiet. The patients were still, silent. Monitors beeped in perfect rhythm. There were no coughs, no footsteps, no signs of life. Then I passed room 216 and noticed something strange. The patient, Mr. Hallman, was missing. The bed was neatly made, like no one had used it. I checked the chart. His vitals had been recorded only an hour ago. When I went to the front desk to ask the other nurse on duty, she frowned. Mr. Hallman, we discharged him 2 weeks ago. No, he was here last night, I insisted. I checked his IV drip myself. She shook her head. You must be thinking of someone else. But I remembered. He had told me about his granddaughter. He had shown me her picture. That wasn't a memory I made up. I went back to room 216. The picture was gone. So was his file. It was like he had never existed. At 12:12 a.m., the back exit door knocked again. But this time, instead of the usual 3 and 3 pattern, it was frantic, desperate, slam after slam, like someone throwing their entire body against it. Then came the scratching. Nails, long, ragged, dragging down the glass. I didn't look. I didn't move. I kept my back turned until it stopped. But when I finally glanced at the camera feed, it showed nothing. Not the door, not the hallway, just static. For the next 20 minutes, every camera across the hospital went blank. It wasn't until they came back on that I saw what had replaced the feed. My face. Close up, blurred, breathing heavily. The angle suggested the camera was placed directly above me. I looked up. Nothing there. I turned off the monitor. Just before 1 a.m., I noticed something dripping from the ceiling tiles in the hallway near the ICU. At first, I thought it was a leaky pipe, but the liquid was dark and thick. Blood, maybe, maybe not. I grabbed a step stool from the supply closet and climbed up to push one of the tiles aside. Behind it, I found a mouth, a human mouth, stitched into the insulation. Lips dry and cracked, but twitching. It whispered without sound. I fell backward. The step stool tipped. I hit the floor hard. When I looked again, the tile was back in place. I didn't go near the ceiling for the rest of the night. At 2:10 a.m., I was near the cafeteria when I noticed something odd about the vending machine. All the snack packages inside had turned black. Not empty, not missing, just blacked out. The drinks were filled with thick, cloudy water. And behind the glass, something was pressing against it from the inside, like fingers, slow and deliberate, tapping against the plastic from the wrong side. I didn't touch it. I remembered the rules again. There wasn't one about vending machines, but that didn't mean it was safe. By 2:26 a.m., I was taking the long hallway back toward the nurse's station when the lights flickered violently. I froze. It wasn't 3:17 yet. Something tall was waiting at the end of the hallway, taller than the ceiling should have allowed. A figure made of shadow and smoke, shifting in place, barely visible in the strobing light. No face, no features, but I knew it was watching me. It took a step forward, and the hallway stretched, not physically, but perceptually. The walls twisted like a camera lens, warping reality. The tiles beneath my feet cracked. I turned and ran the opposite direction. I didn't stop until I reached the stairwell. I yanked the door open, but what greeted me wasn't stairs. It was the hallway from the West Wing. Bleeding walls, screaming echoes, something crawling along the ceiling like a centipede made of arms. I slammed the door shut. My heart thudded in my throat. When I turned around, I was back in the ICU. The hospital had started playing with space. I hid in the supply closet for 20 minutes. When I finally emerged, the lights had gone still again. The tiles were normal, no figures in the hall. But one of the patient doors was wide open, room 304. The lock was gone. The door creaked on its hinges. Inside, darkness spilled like fog. I stood frozen, staring at the doorway. A voice spoke from the darkness inside. Low, calm. You've seen it now. That means you belong. I shut the door and jammed a broom handle through the knob. It wouldn't hold, but it made me feel better. At 3:17 a.m., the West Wing screamed again. But this time it was joined by laughter. Dozens of voices. Children, women, old men, laughing in perfect unison. Then silence. Then I heard the elevator ding. I checked the camera feed. No one was inside. But the doors opened, and something got out. The hallway camera showed static for 2 minutes, then came back on. The figure with no face stood directly in front of the lens, breathing, watching. My nose started to bleed. I turned the feed off again. At 4:05 a.m., a group of people in white coats walked past the lobby. Doctors at first glance. But their coats had blood-soaked cuffs and yellowed name tags with no names. Just numbers. They didn't speak. They just walked in a slow line, turning left at the old administration office. I followed them. I don't know why. The hallway they turned into wasn't supposed to be there. It was just a wall the night before. Now it opened into a corridor with wallpaper peeling like skin and lights swinging from no wires. The doctors entered a room labeled Observation Chamber B. When I peeked inside, there were no people, just empty chairs, buckled restraints, machines covered in sheets, and a mirror facing the door. My reflection wasn't alone. Something stood behind me in the glass, grinning, tall, and misshapen. When I turned around, nothing was there. I ran until I saw daylight. The end of the shift felt like a hallucination. The hospital looked normal again. The nurses were arriving. Phones rang like nothing had happened. My head ached, like someone had tried to rewrite parts of me while I slept. When I got into my car, a message was carved into the steering wheel. 2 more nights. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. By the 5th night, I no longer pretended to be sane. I still wore the uniform. I still clipped the ID badge to my collar. I still nodded at the front desk clerk, even though his eyes didn't move and his smile had been the same for 5 nights. But none of it meant anything anymore. Topeka Hospital was a shell over something else, something much older than brick and tile, something that had been waiting under the floors long before we called this place a hospital. And now it had noticed me. There was no sign of Kelly. Not in the break room, not in the records, not in the staff photos on the wall. It was like she never worked here. But her note was still in my pocket. The rules still existed, and they still kept me alive. I had memorized them by now. 11 lines. 11 fragile little shields against whatever crawled behind the walls. The halls felt tighter that night, the ceilings lower, the corners sharper. I noticed it the second I stepped past the security gate. The hospital was shrinking around me, or I was growing smaller. At 11:10 p.m., I checked on a new patient in room 311. A man in his early 40s, admitted for chest pain. His name was Mr. Ellis. He seemed normal at first, awake, alert. We made small talk. He even joked that the place felt more like a prison than a hospital. I smiled and nodded. Then he leaned forward and whispered, "You know it's not real, right?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" "This place. The things you're seeing. They want you to believe they're spirits, ghosts. But they're not. Ghosts don't build mazes. Ghosts don't change your memories." I stepped back from his bed, suddenly uneasy. He smiled. Too wide, like his face was being pulled apart by invisible strings. "They can hear me right now," he said softly. "That's why I have to stop talking." His lips kept moving, but no sound came out. His eyes darted side to side, and then he went completely still, like a statue. The monitor showed a flat line for 2 seconds, then resumed like nothing had happened. When I looked back at his chart later, it said he had never existed. Room 311 was listed as vacant. At midnight, I was near the old radiology lab when I heard singing. A slow, distorted version of "You Are My Sunshine," warbled like it was playing through a broken speaker. I froze. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, bouncing off the walls. Then came the thumping. Heavy footsteps. Something massive dragging across the floor. I backed into a janitor's closet and shut the door quietly. Through the slats, I saw it pass. A shape at least 8 feet tall, its body like melted plastic, arms swinging backward like broken marionettes. No eyes, no mouth, just a face smoothed over like wax. It paused outside the closet, sniffed, turned. I didn't breathe. Then it moved on. I stayed inside for almost an hour. At 1:35 a.m., I made my way toward the west hallway. Stupid, I know, but I had to know what was back there. Whatever had been bleeding through the tiles, whatever had screamed each night at 317 was growing stronger. I could feel it, and something deep inside me, some suicidal piece of curiosity, wanted to understand it. I passed room 304. The door wasn't just open now, it was gone. The entire wall was black, a shadow swallowing the space where the room used to be. I leaned in and felt warmth, the kind of warmth that comes from deep underground. Breathing, rhythmic warmth. I didn't enter, but I heard whispering from inside. Dozens of voices. Some sounded like people I knew, Kelly, my mother, my own voice. Others were in a language I didn't understand. I backed away, and the whispers laughed. At 2:22 a.m., I broke another rule. The elevator dinged. I don't know why I stepped inside. Maybe I was tired of stairs. Maybe I just didn't care anymore. I pressed the button for the second floor. The doors closed, but I never moved. The numbers blinked, then vanished. The panel went black. I looked at my reflection in the elevator wall. It wasn't me. It looked like me, but older, hair thinner, eyes sunken, lips moving even though I wasn't speaking. Then the reflection turned to face me. I didn't move, but it did, and it smiled. The elevator opened into darkness, not a floor, not a hallway, just a void. I didn't step out. I couldn't. A hand reached through the darkness, thin, bony, with fingers too long. I slapped the emergency button. Nothing. Then the lights came back on and the elevator door closed on the hand. It vanished like smoke. I returned to the nurse's station and didn't leave it for a long time. At 3:17 a.m., the screams returned. But this time, I could make out words. "Let us in! Let us out! Let us in! Let us out!" The west hallway lit up in red. Something paced the corridor slowly. Tall, grinning. It stopped every few steps and stared at the camera. Then something else happened. My name tag changed. Where it once said Clara Hayes, it now read Property of Observation B. I tried to remove it, but it had fused to my uniform. At 4 a.m., I stood near the main doors. No one came knocking this time. No ghost, no staff imposter, just silence. But then my phone buzzed. I hadn't checked it all shift. I pulled it from my pocket and found a single message from an unknown number. "There is no sixth night." I blinked at the screen. Another message appeared. "You've always worked here. Don't you remember?" More messages followed, one after another. "You signed the paper. You look behind the tile. You saw the door. You spoke to the ones in the mirror. Then one final message. Tomorrow, you're not going home. I dropped the phone. It shattered. The moment the sun rose, I walked to the break room. No coffee, no staff, no Kelly, only silence. The hospital was waiting, and I knew with a kind of certainty that gnawed at my ribs that the next night wasn't a shift. It was a ceremony. The sixth night felt like walking into my own funeral. I parked in the same spot I always did, but the parking lot was empty, not quiet, empty. No cars, no lights on in the lobby. The sky above the hospital was an unnatural black, like something had turned the stars off. The air was thick with heat, even though the forecast had predicted rain. I stepped inside the hospital, and the automatic doors didn't open on their own this time. I had to push them manually. They groaned like bones under pressure. Inside, everything had changed. The front desk was gone. The walls were stripped of their paint, exposing rusted rebar and pulsing veins. The floor was soft beneath my feet, as if the tiles were just a membrane stretched over something living. The hallway lights didn't flicker anymore. They were steady, glowing with a deep red hue that painted every surface like dried blood. My footsteps echoed differently now, muted, swallowed up by the building itself. The rule sheet in my pocket burned. Every night before this one had been about survival. Following the rules. Staying quiet. Avoiding the things that lurked behind doors and walls. But not tonight. Tonight, the hospital wasn't playing anymore. At 11:06 p.m., I checked the patient list on the old terminal. It only had one name on it. Mine. No room number. No vitals. Just my name, repeating across the screen like a glitch. Clara Hayes. Clara Hayes. Clara Hayes. I hit the escape key. The screen blinked off. A loudspeaker crackled overhead for the first time since I started working here. The voice that spoke wasn't human. It was layered, like hundreds of people speaking in sync. Final phase initiated. Subject, Clara Hayes. Proceed to room 304. Room 304. The room that had been locked. The room with the breath behind the door. The room that had disappeared. I didn't move. The hallway in front of me changed. Not slowly, not subtly. It twisted violently. Walls bending, doorways melting into mouths, ceiling fans spinning backward with fleshy ropes hanging from them. The hospital wasn't pretending anymore. It was showing me what it truly was, and it wanted me to come home. I began walking. Each step felt heavier than the last. The hallway stretched out, doubling in length with every few strides. Doors whispered my name. Lights above burst as I passed. A trail of black footprints followed me, even though I wasn't bleeding. When I reached the place where room 304 used to be, there was only a doorway. No door, just a black void that pulsed with heat. The voices returned. This time they didn't whisper. They screamed. You belong. You looked. You listened. You broke the rules. I stepped inside. The room beyond wasn't a room. It was a cavern of flesh and light and sound. Pulsing red walls, a ceiling made of human hands, a floor that breathed. In the center stood a figure, tall, featureless, no face. But I recognized it anyway. It had followed me in the mirror. It had stood behind me in the elevator. It had watched me every time I blinked. It was wearing my uniform. It raised one hand and pointed to the floor in front of it. A steel table rose from the living ground, and on it, my body, eyes open, still breathing. Who am I? I whispered. The creature tilted its head. Not Clara, it said in my voice. Then everything changed. I was lying on the table. The air was filled with buzzing. Light spun above me in a perfect circle. I couldn't move. Figures surrounded me, their faces a blur of surgical masks and warped skin. They held tools that pulsed with electricity and heat. Not scalpels, keys. One of them leaned close. Kelly. Only not Kelly. Her eyes were black, her mouth stitched into a grin. Her voice came through clenched teeth. You were never meant to leave. You read the rules. That was the contract. They began cutting, not into my skin, but into my memory, pulling out moments. My childhood, my first kiss, the day I got my nursing license. I tried to scream, but my mouth had disappeared. One of them pulled a memory from my temple like thread, held it up to the light, then shoved it into a jar labeled Patient File 304. I understood now. I was becoming part of the hospital. At 3:17 a.m., the entire world flipped. The hospital screamed. The ceiling collapsed into light. The floor opened to darkness. Then silence. I awoke in the break room. Coffee brewed behind me. The sun peeked through the blinds. My uniform was clean, my name tag back to normal. The clock said 6 a.m. A knock came at the door. Kelly, smiling. "You made it through orientation," she said. "Orientation?" I croaked. She handed me a folder. Staff guidelines for Topeka Hospital. Subject, Clara Hayes. Inside, the rule sheet. I tried to speak again, but my voice wasn't my own anymore. It was deeper, slower, like it belonged to someone else entirely. I looked down. My hands weren't mine. They were old, pale, fingers too long, nails like glass. I had become part of it. I was no longer a nurse. I was a rule.